Do is tell the story about reservations in the old days. You told me how they did reservations before computers.
Okay, if you want.
Tell us.
Oh, okay. Okay, you want me to start?
I do.
All right. When I first joined the airline in 1979, they'd only had a computerized reservation system for 3 or 4 years. I worked in the data center and it was brand new. And people I worked with still remembered when people phoned in, and these were young people. They were only in their 20s. It was a very young group. So only a few years before that, when you phoned up, they had the seats, the outline of the airplane, and the seats on little stickies. And when you booked a seat, they pulled off the sticky and put the sticky onto the airplane, so they knew that seat was going to be occupied. So if you booked 22B and C, put stickies on 22B and C, and then they took the stickies were duplicate. The other stickies went on a piece of paper, a cardboard piece of paper, which would become your ticket eventually, your boarding pass, and they put it on a line with a clothespin. And the line went to some central source where they started to accumulate these and mail them out. And that's how they did the reservations.
Wow.
They did it completely manual. And even as late as 1983, when I first started to work as an analyst, after being in accounting, we had the first computers, the first personal computers. And the person before me had a logbook that looked like something out of Charles Dickens. Every flight was written in longhand, the number of people on it, the date, all the relevant information was page after page. There'd be book after book like this. And that's how everything was recorded. It wasn't typed, it was all out in longhand. And every page was added at the bottom of the page. So they added the day, and then they added the week, and then they added the month, and then they added the year by columns. It was all done by hand. And when we first started our senior management, I was a manager at the time, so the vice presidents were young. They were only in their 30s. And the idea of personal computers was so new that they thought that maybe one for every 2 to 3 analysts would be sufficient. They couldn't imagine everybody having their own.
Yeah.
Or several.
Or several. Yes, that's what it was like in 1984. And I remember in 1980, I was working in the data center, and they had the very first prototypes of screens. Before that, everything was in batch. You didn't even have your own screen. So your own screens were coming in, but it was connected to a mainframe. And they deliberately had sound cards put in because they didn't think anybody could operate a computer without having the sound to know that they'd entered the data, and when they pushed the button something was happening.
Oh.
So I remember there was a big debate because they didn't need the sound card. Obviously it worked fine without a sound card. And this wasn't in PCs, this was in dumb terminals. So that's the beginning of the electronic age, and we were at the forefront of the industry. The first industries to use large data systems were airlines, real-time processing.
The first private sale, the first sale of a computer to a private company was to American Airlines.
Yes.
Right after, about a year after they sold it to NORAD.
Yes.
IBM was actually, coincidentally, one of the executives was on Airline, on American Airlines, was talking right next to the president of American Airlines. Said, "Oh, you're this company IBM. So how's the typewriter business?" He says, "Oh, it's I guess it's going okay, but right now we're really interested because we did this computer thing for NORAD. It helps organize all this stuff and organize where all the planes are going and everything." And he's like, "Really? Would that be any use to us?" And so that's how computers started. And then the famous line that IBM figured the world market for computers is about 5.
Oh yes, yes. That was the beginning.
Slightly
of
underestimated the world market for computers.
Yep. Because American Airlines invented the inventory control system. A few years later, People's Express started up, first discount airline. And they were having all the big carriers for breakfast because they were offering discount seats. Before that, there were no discount seats. You paid full fare, or you paid an excursion and pretended you were a group,
Okay.
and that was it. And Peoples were selling X% of their seats on every flight, cheap. And American couldn't afford to do that, so American invented inventory control. A woman I worked briefly for, Barbara Amster, invented it. And she's literally there was two people I worked with that were the mother and father of the computer inventory systems that are used throughout the world for hotels, for airlines. That was her invention. That was her response, and they drove People's Airline out of business
Oh, really?
because they have 35 flights a day between Boston and New York. People's had 4, and they could, by inventing this system of how many they could sell at what price and still break even, or make money, more importantly, the small carrier couldn't compete because because American with 35 seats would offer more seats in a day than they had even if they sold their whole airplane at that price. And that's where that all started too. That was American was until recently was the forefront of the electronic system. In fact, that's why they spun it off into Sabre, became its own company. They were so sophisticated, and they made more money out of Sabre than they did out of the airline, by far. Because the systems that they built, to your point, they sold all the other airlines. They were most of the airlines at one point were driving off a system either invented by American or a hybrid of the same system. Okay.
Very cool.